In the middle of a freezing storm, a Navy SEAL's K9 suddenly stopped at an abandoned pier. There, beneath the broken shelter, a little boy was waiting with a dying flashlight in his hands. He said his grandfather would not wake up, but the key in his coat was hiding something far more dangerous.
Just breathe
that
slowly,
night,
sir.
the SEAL followed
You're
his
gonna be
loyal
okay.
K9 into the snow and found a secret buried since his final mission. A fallen brother,
It's all right.
a child
Easy
who
breaths
never knew
now.
his father, and a dog
You're
who
safe
heard
with
what
us.
every human had missed.
Hero is here too.
What began as a rescue became a miracle that only God could
He's
have
gonna be
placed on
just
that
fine, I
frozen road.
promise.
Before we begin, tell us where
Kept
you're
him
watching
safe until
from.
we arrived.
Leave your thoughts
And
after the
make sure
story.
He likes
And
the
please like
brushing.
and subscribe to help Navy
He's
SEAL and K9
smiling.
Stories reach 1,000 subscribers, so we
Yeah,
can
he
keep
knows
bringing
he's
you
safe
more
now.
powerful stories. The storm came down over Harbor Falls before night had fully settled, turning the small lakeside town into a place of white roofs, empty streets, and windows glowing like tired eyes in the dark. By January, the lake had become a sheet of black ice beneath drifting snow, and the old pier at the edge of town stood half-buried, its wooden posts groaning whenever the wind came off the water. Harbor Falls was not the kind of place that made noise after sunset. People locked their doors early, checked their furnaces twice, and learned to recognize the difference between ordinary winter wind and the kind of cold that could take something from you if you underestimated it. Caleb Mercer never underestimated cold. He never underestimated silence either. A male us. Navy SEAL in his early 30s, Caleb had an angular, rugged face and a sharp jawline, clean-shaven skin, cold blue-gray eyes, and a modern, neat, short undercut haircut with tight, faded sides and a short, textured top. His disciplined, athletic build still carried the posture of a man trained to stay ready even when no one had given an order. He wore a complete standard, issue green digital camouflage uniform, matching blouse and trousers, properly fitted and fully buttoned, with a plain black belt and plain black combat boots. No helmet, no hat, no sunglasses, no eyewear, no tactical vest, no body armor, no gloves, no headset, no backpack, no weapon, no patches, no extra accessories. He looked calm, composed, and authoritative, but anyone who watched closely would notice that calm was not peace. It was control. It was the kind of stillness a man built around himself after too many things had fallen apart. Beside him walked Ranger, a full-grown male Belgian Malinois K9 4 to 5 years old, lean and muscular, with a deep fawn, to mahogany coat, a distinct black facial mask, upright ears, and intense dark amber eyes. Ranger wore a tan tactical K9 vest and a simple working dog collar, moving with focused, obedient, mission-ready steadiness. He faced the same direction as Caleb, matched his pace without needing a command, and watched the world as if every shadow had a message. To the town, Caleb and Ranger were a strange pair, the silent soldier and the silent dog, walking the same roads every night. Whether snow fell, rain came, or the lake wind cut hard enough to sting the bones. To Caleb, the walk was not exercise. It was survival. At night, the old sounds came back if he stayed still too long. The crack of distant fire, the broken voice of a man calling through smoke, the sudden emptiness after a team stopped answering, Mercy Bell. He had not spoken that name out loud in years, but the name lived under his ribs like a splinter the body had failed to push out. The last mission, the one that had left good men behind and brought Caleb home with a pulse, but not much else. He had chosen Harbor Falls because nobody here knew how to ask the right questions. They saw the uniform, the dog, the hard eyes, and they left him alone. That was easier. Loneliness was cleaner than pity. Guilt was quieter when no one tried to comfort it. And yet Caleb was not as hard as he looked. The town did not know that the firewood stack behind Mrs. Halden's house appeared there because Caleb cut it before dawn. They did not know that a bag of groceries left on a porch after a factory layoff came from him. They did not know he paid for medication at the pharmacy under a false note that simply read credit correction. He did not do kindness loudly. Loud kindness asked to be praised. Caleb's kindness moved at night, left no footprints if he could help it, and disappeared before gratitude had time to find him. Ranger was the only one who saw all of it, and perhaps that was why the dog trusted him with a loyalty deeper than training. Ranger had seen Caleb in mud, smoke, fear, and silence. He had seen the man wake from nightmares with his hand pressed to the floor, as if checking whether the ground beneath him was real. He had seen him sit in the dark for hours without turning on a light. The dog never asked questions. He simply stayed. That night, they were 1 block from the old lakeside pier when Ranger stopped. It happened so suddenly that Caleb's body reacted before his mind did. His shoulders tightened. His eyes moved left, then right, scanning storefront windows, alley mouths, parked trucks under snow, the dark line where the lake met the pier. Ranger stood rigid in the middle of the sidewalk. His ears were forward, his tail low, his head lifted toward the frozen pier. No bark came, no growl. Only a low sound from his chest, almost too soft to hear beneath the wind. Caleb knew every sound Ranger made. This was not threat. This was not pursuit. This was something worse. Concern. Ranger, Caleb said quietly. The dog did not look back. Caleb stepped closer, his boots crunching in the snow. What is it? Ranger took 1 step forward, then another. Slow at first, then faster. He moved toward the pier with the certainty of an animal following something. No human sense had fully caught. Caleb followed without hesitation. The old pier was nearly abandoned now, used mostly in summer by fishermen and teenagers with cheap coffee. In winter, it became a dangerous place, slick with ice and forgotten by everyone except the wind. A small rescue beacon stood near the entrance, an old metal post with a cracked red cover, left from the days when Harbor Falls had a busier harbor patrol tonight. The beacon was dark. Snow had built up around its base. Ranger stopped near the broken shelter beside it and lowered his head. Caleb saw the shape only after the dog moved aside. A child was there, a little boy 6 years old at most, curled under the sagging roof of the shelter with a weak flashlight pressed against his chest. He was small and thin, with pale skin turned pink from the cold, soft, anxious blue, gray eyes, and slightly messy medium. Brown hair damp with snow beneath a dark blue knitted beanie. He wore an oversized dark navy winter coat that swallowed his shoulders, a gray knitted sweater, dark denim pants, and small brown winter boots crusted with ice. His lips trembled, but he was not crying. That was the first thing that hurt Caleb. Children were supposed to cry when the world became too big. This boy was holding his fear in both hands like something breakable. Ranger approached him carefully, head low, body relaxed, tail moving once in a slow, gentle arc. The boy stared at the dog, frightened but not pulling away. Then, with the solemn trust of a child who had run out of choices, he lifted 1 mittened hand and placed it on Ranger's head. Ranger did not move. He simply stood there, warm and steady, letting the boy touch him. Caleb crouched several feet away, keeping his voice low. "Hey, buddy, my name is Caleb. What's your name?" The boy swallowed. "Micah." His voice was small, scraped thin by cold and effort. "Micah Reed." Caleb nodded once, as if receiving important information. "Okay, Micah Reed. Are you hurt?" Micah shook his head, then glanced back toward the road beyond the pier. "My grandpa won't wake up." The words came out carefully, like he had practiced them in his head to keep from falling apart. Caleb felt something inside him tighten. "Where is your grandpa?" "Home," Micah pointed with the flashlight, but the beam barely reached the snow. "The phone didn't work. The lights went off. Grandpa told me if there was an emergency and I couldn't call anyone, I should go to the rescue light by the pier because people used to check it in storms." His chin quivered, but he forced it still. But nobody came. Caleb looked at the dead beacon, the empty pier, the boy's frozen boots. Thomas Reed, whoever he was, had taught the child the best plan he could. The world had simply failed to meet him there. "You did the right thing," Caleb said. "You remembered that matters." Micah looked at Ranger again. He heard me. Caleb's breath caught in a way the cold had nothing to do with. Yeah, he said after a moment. He did. Micah's hand stayed buried in Ranger's fur. Air's fur. He heard me before people did. For 1 second, the pier vanished from Caleb's mind, and he was somewhere else, years earlier, with smoke crawling low over broken ground and Ranger straining against his grip toward a sound no one else believed was there. Caleb had hesitated then. Not long. Just long enough. Long enough for a voice to stop calling. Long enough for guilt to learn his name. He felt the old memory rise, sharp and merciless. But Ranger turned his head and looked at him. Not a command. Not even a plea. A reminder. Here, now, this child. This storm. Caleb pushed the memory down and moved closer. Micah, can you take me to him? The boy nodded quickly, then tried to stand and nearly fell. Caleb caught him before his knees hit the snow. Micah was light, too light, and cold even through the thick coat. I can walk, Micah whispered, embarrassed by needing help. I know you can, Caleb said, but tonight, I'm faster. He lifted the boy into his arms and wrapped one side of his uniform blouse around him as much as he could. Ranger immediately turned toward the road, alert and ready. They left the broken shelter behind and moved off the pier into the storm. Caleb kept one hand firm under Micah and the other braced against the wind. The boy's small fingers clutched the fabric at Caleb's shoulder, not with trust yet, but with need. Sometimes need came first. Trust could follow if a man stayed long enough. They had taken only a few steps when Ranger stopped again. This time he was not looking toward town. He stood beside a half-buried wooden sign near the old dock office, nose close to the snow-crusted letters. Caleb shifted Micah higher in his arms and followed the dog's gaze. The sign was cracked. Weather, beaten, nearly forgotten, but the name carved into it was still visible beneath the ice. The Mercy Bell. Caleb stopped breathing for a beat. The wind moved around him. Snow struck his face. The child in his arms shivered. Ranger looked from the sign to Caleb, then toward the road leading inland. The name should have meant nothing here. Mercy Bell was not supposed to be on a forgotten pier in a small American town. Mercy Bell belonged to another life, another country, another night full of men who never came home. Caleb's hand tightened carefully around Micah, not enough to frighten him, only enough to steady himself. "Mister," Micah whispered, "are you okay?" Caleb looked away from the sign. The boy's eyes were wide and frightened, but still watching him with that painful seriousness. Caleb forced air into his lungs. "I'm okay," he said, though the words felt borrowed. Ranger gave one low, urgent sound and stepped toward the road again. This time Caleb followed. Whatever the name meant, whatever door had just opened inside him, there was still an old man somewhere in the dark who might be running out of time. Caleb had failed to reach a voice once. He would not fail this one. With Ranger leading them through the snow and Micah trembling against his chest, Caleb Mercer left the frozen pier behind. But the name on the sign followed him like a bell struck in the distance, ringing through the storm, ringing through memory, ringing toward a truth that had waited years to be found. The road from the frozen pier to the Reed house was less than a quarter-mile, but in the storm it felt longer, as if Harbor Falls itself were holding its breath between one gust of wind and the next. Caleb Mercer moved fast without running, his black combat boots cutting deep tracks through the snow. One arm wrapped securely around Micah Reed while the other shielded the boy's face from the blowing ice. Micah was still trembling, not violently now, but in small waves that passed through his thin body every few seconds. He kept one mittened hand locked around Caleb's uniform blouse, and the other stretched toward Ranger, as if he needed to know the dog was still there. Ranger stayed 3 steps ahead, a full-grown male Belgian Malinois K9 with a lean, muscular body under his tan tactical vest, his black, masked face turned into the wind, dark amber eyes fixed on the road as though the storm had written instructions only he could read. Caleb could feel the child's breath against his collar. Too fast, too shallow. Fear did that. Cold did that. So did the terrible responsibility of being 6 years old and believing an old man's life depended on how well you remembered directions. Almost there? Caleb asked, keeping his voice steady. Micah nodded against his shoulder. Yellow house, he whispered, by the dead maple. A few moments later, the shape appeared through the snow. A small, weathered yellow house crouched near the edge of the road, its porch sagging slightly, its windows dark, its roof heavy with white. A leafless maple tree stood beside it like a black hand against the sky. The back door was not fully closed. It moved in the wind with a soft, uneven knock that made Caleb's entire body tighten. Ranger reached the porch first and stopped. He did not bark. He lowered his head, sniffed once near the threshold, then looked back at Caleb. That look was enough. Caleb set Micah down gently behind him. Stay close to Ranger, he said. Micah obeyed without argument, sliding one small hand into the fur near Ranger's collar. Caleb pushed the door open with his shoulder. Warmth had already left the house. The first thing he noticed was not danger. It was love. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator in uneven rows, a stick figure with gray hair holding a fishing pole. A small boy beside a big brown dog that did not yet exist in Micah's life when the picture had been made. A lake drawn with too much blue crayon. A yellow house under an orange sun. A pair of small boots sat neatly by the mat. A child's sweater lay over the back of a chair, half mended, with a needle still stuck in the sleeve. On the kitchen table, 2 bowls of soup had gone cold. One was almost empty. The other had barely been touched. Caleb had been inside houses that looked destroyed. This one looked interrupted. That was worse. Grandpa, Micah called, but the word came out so thin it barely crossed the room. Ranger stepped forward, nose low, moving past the kitchen into the living room. Caleb followed and found Thomas Reed on the floor beside the dead fireplace. Thomas was a man of about 68, thin and slightly stooped, even in unconsciousness, with a weathered-lined face, pale, tired blue eyes hidden beneath closed lids, short silver-gray hair, rough gray stubble across his jaw, and large calloused hands that looked as if they had spent a lifetime pulling ropes, repairing docks, and lifting other people out of danger. He wore an old dark olive wool coat over a faded brown plaid flannel shirt, thick charcoal trousers, worn black winter boots, and a gray knitted scarf that had come loose around his neck. Even unconscious, he seemed protective. One arm stretched toward the hallway as if he had tried to reach something before collapsing. Caleb was beside him in seconds. Micah, stay back. The boy froze near the doorway, both hands now buried in Ranger's vest. Caleb checked Thomas's breathing, pulse, skin temperature alive, weak, cold. He pulled a blanket from the couch and wrapped it around the old man, then moved with clean, practiced precision, airway, pulse response, medication. There were prescription bottles on a side table, a weekly pill organizer, a half-empty water glass, and a phone lying dead on the rug. The power was out. The landline was down. Caleb pulled his own phone, found one bar, lost it, then found it again near the front window. He called emergency services and gave the address in a voice that sounded calmer than he felt. Unconscious, elderly male, possible cardiac event, hypothermia risk, weak pulse, child on scene, roads are bad, send medical response now. He ended the call only when the dispatcher confirmed help was moving. Micah stared at his grandfather with a face too still for a child. His lower lip trembled once, but he bit down on it. Caleb recognized that kind of silence. It was not courage exactly. It was a child trying to make a bargain with the world. If I stay quiet, maybe nothing worse will happen. Ranger seemed to recognize it too. The dog crossed the room without command and pressed his warm side against Micah's legs. Micah's hand dropped to Ranger's head. His fingers moved once, then stopped there. Is he dead? Micah asked. Caleb looked up. He never lied to children when truth could be shaped gently. No, he's breathing. I called help. You got me here in time to help him. Micah swallowed. He told me not to be scared. Grandpas say that, Caleb said quietly, even when they are scared themselves. A truck engine sounded outside, followed by quick steps on the porch. The front door opened, and a woman stepped in with a medical bag in one hand and snow caught in her chestnut. Brown hair, Dr. Claire Donovan was about 38, with an average graceful build, calm, intelligent hazel eyes, and a soft but serious face that suggested she had learned long ago how to be kind without becoming fragile. Her shoulder-length hair was tied back loosely, and she wore a long cream winter medical coat over pale blue scrubs, dark practical pants, simple white medical shoes protected by rubber covers, and a small name badge clipped near her collar. She took in the room quickly, Thomas on the floor, Caleb beside him, Micah near Ranger, the dead lights, the cold bowls of soup. Her expression tightened, but her voice stayed composed. "I'm Dr. Claire Donovan. Move the lamp, please." Caleb moved it before she finished the sentence. Claire knelt beside Thomas and began checking him with practiced hands. "Thomas, can you hear me?" No response. She listened to his chest, checked his pulse, lifted one eyelid, then glanced at Caleb. "Good work, keeping him warm. How long was he down?" "Unknown," Caleb said. "Micah found me at the pier." Claire's eyes flicked to the boy. Something passed over her face, pain and admiration at once. "You went to the rescue beacon, didn't you?" Micah nodded. Grandpa said, "You remembered exactly right." Claire's voice softened. "That was very brave." Micah did not seem proud. He looked smaller, but nobody was there. The words landed heavily in the cold room. Claire paused only a second, then returned to Thomas. "Someone he was," she said. "Ranger was." At the sound of his name, Ranger looked at her, then back to Micah, as if accepting the statement as duty rather than praise. The ambulance was still fighting through the storm, so Claire worked where she was. She suspected heart strain, exhaustion, and dangerous cold exposure. She found signs that Thomas had been rationing his medication, not forgetting it, rationing it. Caleb saw the realization in her eyes. The old man had likely stretched pills and meals to keep the child fed and warm. The anger that rose in Caleb was quiet and familiar. It was the same anger he felt at systems that failed people softly, without a gunshot, without noise until a 6-year. Old had to walk into a blizzard to save the only family he had. While Claire prepared an injection and Caleb adjusted the blanket, Ranger suddenly lifted his head. His ears went rigid. He left Micah's side, crossed to the narrow hallway, and stopped before a small closet door beneath the stairs. He did not scratch. He did not bark. He simply stared at the door and released one low, mournful sound that made Micah whisper, "That's where Grandpa keeps the things I'm not supposed to touch." Caleb looked at Claire. Claire looked back at him. For a moment, Thomas Reed's failing body was not the only emergency in the house. Something else was present, hidden behind that door, waiting in the dark. The ambulance lights washed red across the windows before Caleb could open it. 2 paramedics entered with a stretcher, both bundled in heavy winter gear, their faces focused and efficient. As they lifted Thomas, the old man stirred. His pale eyes opened just a sliver. He seemed to search the room, passing over Claire, over Micah, then stopping on Caleb's face. His fingers moved weakly and caught Caleb's sleeve. "Nolan," Thomas rasped. Caleb leaned closer. "What did you say?" Thomas's breath hitched. "I kept the box for Nolan." His gaze drifted toward the hallway closet, but they started looking again. Caleb felt the world narrow around those words. Who started looking? Thomas tried to answer, but his strength failed. His hand slipped from Caleb's sleeve, and the paramedics moved him toward the door. Micah made a small sound and stepped forward, but Ranger blocked him gently with his body, not stopping him cruelly, only keeping him from running into the rush of medical movement. Claire crouched before the boy. "Micah, they're taking your grandpa to the hospital so doctors can help him. I'm going with him for now, and Sheriff Vale is on his way here." "I want Ranger," Micah said immediately, his voice breaking for the first time. Caleb expected Claire to refuse. A child did not belong with a stranger, even a stranger who had helped. Claire looked at Caleb carefully, measuring him not by the uniform but by the restraint in his face. The way he stood away from Micah unless needed. The way Ranger had chosen the child without command. "Ranger can stay with you until we figure out the safest place," she said. "But we do this properly." Another vehicle arrived outside, slower than the ambulance, heavier. Sheriff Owen Vale stepped in a minute later, a tall, broad-shouldered man of about 52 with a square, weathered face. Tired but honest brown eyes, short dark brown hair streaked with gray, and salt and pepper stubble along his jaw. He wore a dark brown winter sheriff jacket with a small badge, a tan uniform shirt, dark brown uniform trousers, a black duty belt, black snow boots, and a simple black knitted beanie dusted with snow. Owen had the look of a man who had spent years being responsible for other people's worst nights. He noticed everything: Caleb's uniform, Ranger's vest, Micah's shaking hands. The closet door Ranger still faced. "Caleb Mercer," Owen said, not as a greeting but not as an accusation either. Caleb nodded. "Sheriff." Owen looked to Claire. "Thomas. Alive. Critical but alive." Owen exhaled through his nose, then turned to Micah. His face softened. "You did good, son." Micah stared at the floor. "I left the door open." "You left to get help," Owen said. "There's a difference." Caleb appreciated that. A small correction, but the kind a child might carry for years if no one said it right. Owen took a brief statement from Caleb, then from Claire, then made a call about child services. The storm had closed the main road, and no official placement could reach Harbor Falls that night. Claire offered the clinic's back room as a temporary safe place for Micah, with Owen documenting the arrangement. Caleb did not argue. He did not ask to take the boy. He only watched Micah's hand remain locked in Ranger's fur and felt the strange ache of being needed by someone who did not know him. Before they left, Claire went to get Micah's dry clothes from a small dresser. When she lifted the wet coat from the chair, something fell from the pocket and struck the floor with a soft metallic click. Caleb turned. A small key lay on the rug, tied with a faded red cord. Claire picked it up and frowned. 3 letters had been carved into the metal. Me br. Caleb's chest tightened so hard he almost forgot to breathe. Me brar Mercy Bellroot, the same marking he had once seen on supply crates before the mission that shattered his life. Ranger came to stand beside him, silent. Now, his amber eyes fixed on the key, as if the dog understood that the storm outside had only been the beginning. Micah looked from Caleb to the key. "Grandpa said it was for when the right man came," he whispered. Caleb could not move. In the distance, the ambulance siren faded toward the hospital. Inside the little yellow house, beneath the dead lights and children's drawings, the past had just reached into the present and placed itself in Caleb Mercer's hand. By morning, the storm had loosened its grip on Harbor Falls, but it had not left. Snow still moved across the streets in pale sheets, pushed by a lake wind that found every gap between buildings and pressed cold fingers through them. The town looked bruised in the gray light, porch rails buried, cars softened into white shapes, the frozen lake hidden behind drifting fog. Caleb Mercer had slept less than an hour in a hard chair outside the back room of Dr. Claire Donovan's clinic, and even that hour had not been real sleep. It had been the old half-sleep of a soldier who never fully trusted walls. Every sound brought him halfway upright, a furnace shifting, a branch tapping glass, Micah Reed turning under a blanket, Ranger lifting his head from the floor. Caleb sat with his elbows on his knees, still in his complete green digital camouflage uniform, clean-shaven face drawn tight, cold blue-gray eyes fixed on the small key lying on the table in front of him. Meanbar 3 letters carved into metal, too small to carry the weight they had carried into the room the night before. But there they were, refusing to become ordinary. Mercy Bellroot. Caleb had seen those letters once on a supply manifest that should never have been in a combat zone. He had told himself for years that memory was damaged by smoke, grief, and guilt. But the key was real. It had weight. It had edges. It had come from the coat pocket of a 6-year-old boy whose grandfather had nearly died beside a cold fireplace. Ranger lay near the closed door of the clinic's small recovery room, his tan tactical vest still on, his deep fawn to mahogany coat dark against the pale floor. Black facial mask turned toward Caleb. His intense amber eyes were open. He had not slept much either. Inside the room, Micah was finally resting. One small hand still curled around the corner of Ranger's working dog collar through the gap in the door whenever the dog lay close enough. Micah had refused to let the collar go until exhaustion took him. Caleb understood that kind of grip. Sometimes a person did not hold on because they believed everything would be fine. Sometimes they held on because letting go meant admitting how much had already been lost. Claire came down the hallway carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. She looked more tired than she had the night before, but not weaker, Doctor. Claire Donovan was the kind of woman whose calm did not come from having an easy life. It came from choosing usefulness over panic so many times that usefulness had become her second skin. Her cream winter medical coat was open over pale blue scrubs. Her chestnut, brown hair tied loosely at the back of her neck, a few strands escaping around her serious hazel eyes. "Thomas made it through transport," she said, handing Caleb a cup. "He's stable, but weak. The hospital wants to keep him monitored. Heart strain, exposure, exhaustion. He'll need time." Caleb accepted the coffee but did not drink. Did he say anything else? Claire's eyes moved to the key. Not clearly. He asked if Micah was safe. Then he asked if the dog stayed. Ranger's ears twitched. Caleb looked toward him, then back at the key. He knew Ranger mattered. Or Nolan told him he would, Claire said quietly. Caleb did not answer. The name had been inside his head all night. Nolan, Sergeant Nolan Reed. Young, sharp, always too hopeful for the kind of places they had been sent. Caleb remembered a laugh that broke tension before missions. A photograph tucked carefully into a waterproof sleeve. A man who wrote letters by hand because he said a child should one day know the shape of his father's words. Caleb had never known the child's name. Now that child was asleep 10 feet away. The front door opened, and Sheriff Owen Vale stepped in with snow on his boots and a file folder under one arm. Owen looked like he had been awake as long as Caleb, tall, broad, shouldered, square-faced, with honest brown eyes shadowed by fatigue, short, dark hair streaked gray beneath a black knitted beanie, and salt and pepper stubble that made him look older than 52 in the winter light. His dark brown sheriff jacket was zipped high, badge dulled by melting snow. Behind him came a younger woman in a dark navy winter police jacket, gray thermal shirt, dark tactical trousers, black duty belt, and black winter boots. She had a fit, practical build, sharp, youthful features, focused gray, green eyes, and dark blonde hair tied in a low, neat ponytail. A small shoulder radio clicked softly near her collar. "Deputy Nora Blake," Owen said. "She handles most of what passes for technology in this town, which means she handles all of it." Nora gave Caleb a quick nod, direct but not rude. "I hear there's an old key, a sick man, a frightened child, and a soldier who looks like he already knows more than he wants to say." Owen glanced at her. "Nora, what?" I summarized. Caleb almost smiled. Almost Nora's bluntness was not careless. It was a shield, thin but useful. The kind younger officers sometimes wore before the world taught them how much weight silence could carry. Owen placed the folder on the table. I checked Thomas's house again after sunrise. Back storage room was disturbed. Floorboard lifted and reset. Whoever searched it tried to be neat but not neat enough. Claire folded her arms. "Somebody broke in before last night." "Looks that way," Owen said. "Could be days, could be a week." Nora opened the folder and slid a paper across. Also, Mrs. Evelyn Harper from next door saw a dark vehicle near Thomas's place twice this week. Caleb looked up. "Who is she?" 74, Owen said. "Widow, lives alone. Small woman, sharp eyes, scared of becoming trouble to anyone." She didn't call because whoever sat in that vehicle looked back at her long enough to make sure she noticed. Caleb's jaw tightened. Pattern was forming. Quiet pressure. An old man watched. A house searched. A child carrying a key. Claire looked toward the recovery room door. Micah can't be near this. He already is, Caleb said, then regretted the sharpness in his voice. Claire did not flinch. Then the adults need to stop making it worse. Ranger suddenly stood. No command, no warning. He crossed to the table, sniffed the key once, then turned toward the clinic window facing the road. His body went still in the exact way it had at the frozen pier. Caleb followed his gaze. Outside, through the blowing snow, a dark pickup sat across the street for 3 seconds too long. Its engine was running. Its windows were tinted. The moment Caleb moved toward the door, the truck rolled away slowly. Not fast enough to be panic, not slow enough to be innocent. Micah's small voice came from the recovery room behind them. That truck was outside Grandpa's house. Everyone turned. The boy stood in the doorway wrapped in a blanket, pale, barefoot, hair messy from sleep, one hand gripping the frame. He looked at Ranger, not at Caleb, as if the dog were the safest place to put the truth. I saw it when Grandpa told me to hide the key. The room changed after that. Not loudly. No one shouted. But Caleb felt the air tighten. Owen crouched slightly so he would not tower over Micah. Son, when did your grandpa tell you to hide the key? Micah looked down at his bare toes. Yesterday before dinner, he said. If the lights went out or if he got sick, I should keep it in my coat. He said, not to give it to anybody unless the man with the dog came. His voice became smaller. I thought he meant a real dog, but maybe he meant Ranger. Caleb felt Claire's eyes on him. Owen's too. Caleb kept his face still, but inside, something old shifted painfully. Nolan had known, or suspected enough to leave instructions years ago. Did your grandpa say what the key opened? Nora asked gently. Micah shook his head. Then he looked toward Caleb. He said it opened the place where Dad told the truth. The words landed harder than any accusation. Dad, Caleb stared at the boy and saw Nolan's face suddenly. Not as he had died, but as he had been before everything went wrong. Young, tired, hopeful, talking about a son he had not met yet, with the wonder of a man afraid to believe he deserved joy. Claire crossed to Micah and wrapped the blanket tighter around his shoulders. You were very brave telling us. Micah did not seem to hear. His eyes were fixed on Ranger, who had returned to his side and pressed his shoulder lightly against the boy's hip. Owen straightened. We checked the key properly. Caleb picked it up. Dock storage 17. Owen's brow furrowed. How do you know? Because Mimbar isn't just letters. It was a route marking. Mercy Bell route. If Thomas kept something tied to that, he would put it where the route began. Nora pulled out her phone and searched local records. There is a dock storage 17. Old harbor unit. Decommissioned section near the pier, currently attached to property once used by the civil aid program. She looked up, and now leased through a repair yard. Whose? Caleb asked, though some part of him already knew the answer would not feel clean. Cole Marine Repair, Nora said. Owen's mouth flattened. Evan Cole. The name meant little to Caleb, but Claire reacted. Evan helps half the town with boat repairs. He fixed Thomas's heater 2 winters ago. Good men can do bad things, Owen said, and bad men can fix heaters. They left Micah with Claire at the clinic under Owen's temporary protective arrangement. Micah did not want Ranger to go, but Caleb knelt in front of him and spoke carefully. Ranger is going to help me check something. Then he comes back. Micah studied Caleb with those anxious blue-gray eyes. You promise. Caleb hated promises. Promises were dangerous because the world enjoyed breaking them. But he looked at the boy, then at Ranger, and knew this was not the moment for a soldier's caution. I promise. Micah nodded once, then touched Ranger's head. Find the place, he whispered. Ranger licked the boy's mitten, then followed Caleb into the snow. Dock Storage 17 sat beyond the old pier where the harbor buildings grew smaller and more neglected. Sheriff Owen came with Caleb, and Nora followed in a patrol SUV, documenting their arrival on a body camera. Owen made sure everything was legal, no forced entry, no pocketed evidence, no private war disguised as investigation. Caleb resented the delay and appreciated it at the same time. The old Caleb, the one built by missions and loss, wanted to break the lock and drag the truth into the light by force. The man Micah had looked at that morning understood that truth handled carelessly could hurt the innocent first. The key slid into the lock with a rough metallic scrape. It turned. Inside, the storage unit smelled of old rope, dust, lake damp, and something faintly chemical. Ranger entered first, slow and alert. A wooden crate sat beneath a tarp in the back corner. Beside it were rolled maps, a rusted lantern, and a framed photograph wrapped in cloth. Owen photographed everything before touching it. Nora logged each item. Caleb stood very still. On the crate, burned faintly into the wood, were the letters MBR. Under them was a symbol Caleb had not seen since the night Mercy Bell became a graveyard, a small bell inside a broken circle. His hands curled at his sides. Owen lifted the tarp. Beneath it was a weather, sealed wooden box, old but carefully preserved. Inside were paper files sealed in plastic, a damaged military USB drive, and several photographs. One photo showed a younger Thomas Reed standing near the pier beside a bright-eyed young soldier in uniform. Sergeant Nolan Reed had a lean, athletic build, warm green eyes, an open, sincere face, sandy brown hair cut short, and light stubble across a jaw that had not yet learned how much grief it would carry. He wore a standard green digital camouflage uniform with plain black boots and no tactical gear, smiling like a man who still believed he had time. In his hand, he held a small folded paper. Caleb knew without being told that it was probably a photo of his child. Caleb's throat tightened. "Nolan," he said under his breath. Owen heard. "You knew him." Caleb did not look away from the photograph. "He was on my team." Nora carefully lifted the damaged USB. "This thing's old. Maybe water. Damaged. I can try to pull data, but no promises." Caleb almost laughed at the word. No promises. At least she was honest. Footsteps crunched outside. Ranger turned instantly, placing himself between Caleb and the open door. A man appeared in the doorway with snow dusting the shoulders of a faded dark green work jacket. Evan Cole was about 45, sturdy and working, class with a rough sun, weathered face, restless light brown eyes, short dirty, blonde hair, uneven stubble, dark work pants, heavy mud-stained boots, and a red-brown flannel shirt visible beneath his jacket. He wore a nervous, forced, friendly expression, the kind of smile that arrived before warmth did. "Sheriff," Evan said, "didn't know anyone was using the old units." Owen stepped slightly toward him. "We're conducting an inquiry." Evan's eyes moved past him, landed on the box, then on Caleb, then on Ranger. The dog's low growl rolled through the storage unit. Evan's smile twitched. "That stuff is probably junk. Civil aid leftovers. Thomas always had trouble letting go of old things." Caleb watched him carefully. "You know Thomas?" "Everybody knows Thomas." Evan's gaze flicked again to the USB in Nora's evidence bag. "Too quick, too hungry. You folks should be careful digging through old military scraps. Sometimes things are classified for a reason." Caleb felt the old cold settle over him. "And sometimes they're buried because someone lied." Evan's face changed for half a second. Not anger. Fear. Then the smile came back. "Well, I'll leave you to it." He stepped away from the door, but Ranger remained rigid until the sound of his boots faded. Owen looked at Caleb. Nora looked at the evidence bag. No one spoke for several seconds. Outside, the wind pushed snow against the storage unit walls. Inside, Caleb stared at Nolan's photograph and the damaged USB that might hold the last words of a dead man. He had come to Harbor Falls to hide from Mercy Bell. Now Mercy Bell had opened a door beneath a frozen pier, placed a child in his arms, and left him standing in front of the truth with Ranger growling at the dark. 3. A male U.S. Navy SEAL in his early 30s with an angular, rugged face, sharp jawline, clean, shaven skin, cold blue-gray eyes, modern, neat, short undercut haircut, with tight faded sides and short textured top. Disciplined athletic build, complete standard issue green digital camouflage uniform, plain black belt and black combat boots, sitting exhausted in a hard chair with elbows on knees while staring at a small metal key carved with MBR. On a clinic table, a full-grown male Belgian Malinois K9 with deep fawn to mahogany coat, black facial mask, upright ears, tan tactical K9 vest and working, dog collar lying alert near a half-open recovery room door. A small 6-year-old American boy sleeping faintly visible behind the door. Cold gray morning clinic hallway, close-up key foreground, with medium background cinematic shot, a full-grown male Belgian Malinois K9 4-5 years old, lean muscular build. Deep fawn to mahogany coat, distinct black facial mask, upright ears, intense dark amber eyes, tan tactical K9 vest and simple working, dog collar lying close to a half-open clinic recovery room door while a small 6-year-old American boy with pale winter. Cold skin, anxious blue-gray eyes, messy medium brown hair, dark navy winter coat nearby, gray blanket over the body, resting inside the room with one small hand curled around the K9 collar through the gap. A male, us, Navy SEAL in green digital camouflage uniform, sitting blurred in the distant hallway, low floor, level intimate shot a 38-year. Old American female doctor with average graceful build. Calm, intelligent hazel eyes, soft, serious face, shoulder, length chestnut. Brown hair tied back loosely, wearing a long cream winter medical coat over pale blue scrubs, dark practical pants, white medical shoes and small name badge, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee toward a seated male U.S. Navy SEAL in complete green digital camouflage uniform beside a clinic table with a small MBR key. A full-grown Belgian Malinois K9 lying near the recovery room door. Cold clinic hallway with pale morning light. Over. The shoulder shot from behind the doctor, a 52-year-old American sheriff with tall, broad-shouldered build, square, weathered face, tired, honest brown eyes, short, dark brown hair streaked with gray salt, and pepper stubble, wearing a dark brown winter sheriff jacket with a small badge, tan uniform shirt, dark brown uniform trousers, black duty belt, black snow boots and black knitted beanie, stepping through the clinic front door with a file folder under one arm beside a 29-year-old American female deputy with fit, practical build, focused gray-green eyes, sharp, youthful face, dark blonde hair tied in a low, neat ponytail, chocolate gray thermal shirt, dark tactical trousers, black duty belt, black winter boots and shoulder radio, a male U.S. Navy SEAL and a 38-year-old female doctor waiting inside with a Belgian Malinois K9 nearby, snow on boots and cold outdoor lights spilling into the clinic. Wide doorway reveal shot a 52-year-old American sheriff in a dark brown winter sheriff jacket, placing a file folder on a clinic table, a 29-year-old American female deputy in a dark navy winter police jacket sliding a report across the table, a 38-year-old American female doctor in a cream winter medical coat folding arms with concern, a male U.S. Navy SEAL in complete green digital camouflage uniform standing tense beside the table. A full-grown Belgian Malinois K9 lying alert near the recovery room door. Investigation papers about a disturbed storage room and a dark vehicle spread around the small MBR key. Cold clinic office top-down medium table shot a full-grown male Belgian Malinois K9 with deep fawn to mahogany coat, black facial mask, upright ears, tan tactical K9 vest and working, dog collar, standing rigid in the clinic with body facing a snowy window. A male Navy SEAL in complete green digital camouflage uniform, turning sharply toward the road, a 38-year-old female doctor and 52-year-old sheriff reacting behind, a small 6-year-old American boy wrapped in a blanket appearing at the recovery room doorway. A dark pickup truck with tinted windows idling across the snowy street outside through window suspense shot from inside the clinic. A small 6-year-old American boy with pale winter, cold skin, soft anxious blue, gray eyes, slightly messy medium, brown hair, barefoot, wrapped in a gray blanket standing in the clinic recovery room doorway while speaking with frightened honesty. A full-grown male Belgian Malinois K9 with deep fawn to mahogany coat, black facial mask, tan tactical vest and working. Dog collar pressed beside the boy's hip, a 52-year-old American sheriff crouching slightly to listen. A male Navy SEAL in green digital camouflage uniform and a 38-year-old female doctor standing nearby with serious concern. Cold clinic hallway, child-centered medium shot at boy eye level, a small 6-year-old American boy with pale skin, anxious blue-gray eyes, messy medium, brown hair and gray blanket around the shoulders, touching the head of a full-grown male Belgian Malinois K9 with deep fawn to mahogany coat, black facial mask, tan tactical K9 vest and working. Dog collar while whispering a request. A male Navy SEAL in complete green digital camouflage uniform, kneeling in front of the boy with controlled tenderness, a 38-year-old female doctor standing protectively behind, a 52-year-old sheriff nearby, clinic recovery room doorway, and pale hallway light. Low emotional close shot focused on the boy's hand, and the K9, a full-grown male Belgian Malinois K9, 4-5 years old. Lean muscular build, deep fawn to mahogany coat, distinct black facial mask, tan tactical K9 vest and working, dog collar. Entering an Old Harbor storage unit first, with alert slow steps, a male U.S. Navy SEAL in complete green digital camouflage uniform, following behind with tense focus. A 52-year-old American sheriff in dark brown winter sheriff jacket. Photographing evidence, a 29-year-old female deputy in dark navy police jacket. Documenting items on a body camera. Old ropes, rolled maps, rusted lantern, wooden crate beneath a tarp and cold damp walls inside dock storage, 17 near the frozen pier. Low interior tracking shot, a 45-year-old American working, class man with sturdy build, rough sun, weathered face, restless light brown eyes, short dirty blonde hair, uneven stubble, faded dark green work jacket, red-brown flannel shirt, dark work pants and heavy mud-stained boots, standing nervously in the open doorway of dock storage, 17 with snow behind the body. A full-grown Belgian Malinois K9 with deep fawn to mahogany coat, black facial mask, tan tactical vest, and working dog collar, growling while standing between the doorway and a male U.S. Navy SEAL in complete green digital camouflage uniform. A 52-year-old sheriff and a 29-year-old female deputy near an opened weather. Sealed wooden box containing plastic. Sealed files, a damaged military USB drive and old photographs. Cold storage unit interior with snow blowing outside. Doorway tension wide shot. By the time Caleb Mercer returned to Dr. Claire Donovan's clinic, the snow over Harbor Falls had turned from a storm into a silence. It lay thick along the sidewalks and window ledges, softening the town's edges until everything looked gentler than it really was. Caleb knew better than to trust quiet. Quiet could be a wounded man holding his breath. Quiet could be a house after the lights went out. Quiet could be a black truck pulling away slowly enough to pretend it had never been watching. He stepped through the clinic door with Ranger at his side, the Belgian Malinois moving with alert steadiness, tan tactical vest dusted with snow. black masked face lifted toward the hallway where Micah Reed had been sleeping. Sheriff Owen Vale followed with the sealed evidence bag, and Deputy Nora Blake carried the damaged USB drive as if it were fragile enough to break the past if handled wrong. Caleb still felt the weight of the photograph from Doc Storage 17 in his mind. Nolan Reed's young face, that open smile, those warm green eyes, the look of a man who had not yet learned his own death, was already moving toward him through paperwork, roots, and lies. Caleb had known Nolan as a soldier. Micah knew him only as a name people lowered their voices around. That difference hurt more than Caleb expected. Claire was waiting near the recovery room with her arms folded, cream medical coat open over pale blue scrubs, chestnut, brown hair loosely tied back, hazel eyes calm but sharp. She looked first at Caleb's face, not the evidence bag, and Caleb knew immediately that she had already guessed the box had not brought peace. "Micah is awake," she said quietly. "He keeps asking if you found the place. What did you tell him?" "That adults are still figuring out what is safe to say." Her voice held no accusation, but it still landed like one. "He is 6, Caleb. Not a witness, not a soldier, not a file you can open just because the truth is inside." Caleb's jaw tightened. He had been trained to move toward truth, toward threat, toward the thing everyone else ran from. But Claire spoke about Micah as if truth had weight, as if it could crush a child if handed over too quickly. Ranger moved ahead and nudged the recovery room door with his nose. A small voice inside said, "Ranger." The dog slipped in before Caleb could stop him. Caleb followed more slowly. Micah sat on a narrow clinic cot, wrapped in a gray blanket. His dark navy coat folded on a chair nearby. His slightly messy medium, brown hair sticking up from sleep. His pale face looked even smaller in the white medical light. His blue-gray eyes went first to Ranger, then to Caleb. He did not ask about the box. He did not ask about the USB. He asked the question children ask when they already know adults have been hiding the hardest part. "Did you find my dad?" The room seemed to narrow. Claire stood behind Caleb, silent. Sheriff Owen remained in the hallway, giving the child space. Caleb pulled a chair close, but did not sit until Micah nodded. Ranger laid his head on the edge of the cot, and Micah's fingers disappeared into the fur behind the dog's ears. Caleb kept his voice low. "We found something that belonged to him." Micah stared at him. Was he bad? The question was so small and so unfair that Caleb had to look down for half a second. He saw Nolan in the old photograph. Nolan laughing under a hard sun. Nolan writing letters by flashlight. Nolan touching a folded paper in his chest pocket before a mission. "No," Caleb said. "Your father was not bad." Micah blinked fast. He was trying not to cry with the stubborn dignity of a child who had already decided tears might make adults leave. "Then why does everyone get quiet when I ask about him?" Caleb drew a slow breath. "Because sometimes good people get caught inside things that hurt too much to explain." Micah's hand tightened in Ranger's fur. "Grandpa said Dad was brave." "He was. Were you with him?" Caleb looked at the boy, and the years between then and now felt thin as paper. "Yes." Micah's voice dropped. "Did he know about me?" Caleb answered faster than he intended. "Yes." Then softer, because the truth deserved care. "He carried you with him before he ever got to hold you. He talked about you like you were already the best part of his life." Micah lowered his head. For a moment, Caleb thought the boy would finally cry. Instead, Micah swallowed hard and whispered, "I don't remember him." Caleb felt something inside him twist. "That doesn't mean he didn't love you." Ranger gave a low breath, not a whine, not a growl, just a warm sound of presence. Micah leaned his forehead against the dog's head. The clinic was quiet around them, but not empty quiet. This was the kind of quiet that held a fragile thing and hoped no one dropped it. Then Ranger lifted his head sharply. His ears stood rigid, but he did not look toward the front door or the windows. He looked at Micah's folded coat on the chair. Slowly, as if following a memory instead of a scent, Ranger crossed the room, pressed his nose into the coat pocket where the key had been, then turned and stared at Micah. The boy's face changed, not fear this time. Recognition. "Grandpa put something else in there," Micah whispered. Claire stepped forward. Caleb picked up the coat carefully and checked the lining. Hidden inside a small tear near the seam was a thin strip of paper, folded so tightly it looked like nothing. Caleb opened it. Written in shaky handwriting were 4 words. Don't trust Cole. Beneath them was a second line. The man behind him wears clean hands. Caleb did not speak. Sheriff Owen came in when he saw Caleb's face. Nora leaned over his shoulder, reading the note once, then twice. Cole, as in Evan Cole, she said. And clean hands means someone above him, Owen muttered. Someone who doesn't get dirty but makes other people do the work. Caleb folded the note again, but his fingers were too careful, too controlled. Claire saw it. This is exactly what I mean, she said softly. Micah is sitting right here. Micah looked between them. Mr. Cole fixed our heater. I know, Claire said. Did he hurt Grandpa? Micah asked. No one answered quickly enough. That was answer enough for a child. Micah's lips pressed together, and his eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. He looked down at Ranger and whispered, I should have known. Caleb felt a sharp anger rise. Not at Micah, not even fully at Evan, but at the cruel way children blame themselves for adult darkness. He knelt in front of the cot. No, listen to me. You are 6 years old. You were not supposed to know. You were supposed to eat soup, draw pictures, and sleep warm. None of this was yours to carry. Micah looked at him as if he wanted to believe it but had no practice doing so. Ranger moved closer and placed one paw gently on the edge of the cot. The gesture was so deliberate that even Nora stopped moving. Micah laid his hand over the dog's paw. It was the first moment that day his shoulders lowered. Sheriff Owen cleared his throat, though his voice came out rougher than usual. We need to talk to Evan, but not with a child in the room. Claire nodded. Micah stays here, with me. And Ranger, Micah asked immediately. Caleb glanced at the dog. Ranger looked back at him, steady and unreadable. Ranger stays until I have to go, Caleb said. Then he comes with me. Then he comes back. Micah held his gaze. You said that before. And he came back. The boy nodded, accepting not comfort but evidence. In the hallway, Owen lowered his voice. I ran the partial plate Mrs. Evelyn gave us. It doesn't come back to Evan directly. It comes back to a shell company registered 2 counties over. Nora found an old contract between that company and a logistics office tied to Mercy Bell. Nora, standing beside him with her tablet, looked younger in the harsh clinic light, but no less determined. There's another name buried in the metadata from one scanned file. Graham Voss, former military logistics, officially retired. Unofficially, he still consults for private contractors. Caleb felt the name settle somewhere cold inside him. I don't know him. Maybe he knew you, Nora said, or knew your route. The words pulled the air from the hallway. Your route, Mercy Bell route. Mabrar. Caleb saw again the supply crates, the wrong manifest, the terrain that did not match the briefing. The moment Ranger had pulled toward a ridge no one had cleared. He had told himself for years the mission had gone wrong because war was chaos. But what if chaos had been arranged? Claire stepped into the hallway and closed the recovery room door behind her. Caleb, he looked at her. If you go after this like it's still a battlefield, you will become exactly what Micah is afraid of losing. His eyes narrowed. You think I don't know what's at stake? I think you know too much about death and not enough about staying. The words hit him harder than they should have. Owen looked away, giving them privacy without leaving. Claire's expression softened, but she did not take the words back. That boy is already preparing himself for people not to come back. Don't teach him he was right. Caleb turned toward the recovery room window. Through the small glass panel, he could see Micah sitting on the cot with Ranger pressed against his side. The boy's hand moved slowly over the dog's head. Again and again, the same motion a person might use to calm themselves more than the animal. Caleb thought of Nolan's face in the photograph. He thought of promises made before missions, all of them brave, many of them broken by things no man could control. I won't, he said, though the words cost him something. That evening, Claire arranged for Micah to sleep in the clinic's back room again because the roads remained unsafe and Thomas was still hospitalized. Owen posted a deputy outside. Nora took the USB to the small evidence office at the station, promising to try a deeper recovery. Caleb did not like letting the drive out of his sight, but Owen made it clear that evidence stayed evidence. "You want this to hold," the sheriff said. "Then we do it right." Caleb knew he was right. That did not make obedience easy. Night settled early, heavy and blue. The clinic lights flickered once, then steadied. Micah finally fell asleep with Ranger stretched beside the cot, the dog's body forming a living wall between the boy and the door. Caleb sat in the hallway, back against the wall, eyes open. Claire brought him coffee he would not drink. "You can go home," she said. "No. I figured." She sat across from him instead of arguing. For several minutes they listened to the furnace and the distant wind. Then a sound came from the rear of the building, a soft scrape, metal against metal. Ranger was on his feet before Caleb moved. The dog's growl rolled low through the hallway. Caleb stood, one hand raised to signal Claire back. Owen's deputy outside radioed at the same moment. "Sheriff, I've got movement near the rear entrance." Caleb moved fast, but Ranger reached the back hall first. The rear storage door was ajar. Cold air slipped in along the floor. Inside, boxes had been shifted, files scattered, a cabinet drawer forced open. Whoever came had not reached Micah. They had not reached Claire, but they had reached the clinic records connected to Thomas Reed. On the floor near the open door lay something small and deliberate. Nolan Reed's old collar tag, scratched, muddy, and placed where Caleb would see it. A folded note sat beneath it. Owen arrived minutes later and opened the note with gloved hands. The message was short. "Don't let the boy learn who killed his father." Caleb stared at the words until they blurred. Behind him, Micah stood in the hallway, awake again, pale and silent. Ranger pressed against his legs. The boy had seen the tag. He did not cry. That was the worst part. He only looked at Caleb and asked, "If that belonged to my dad, why did the bad people have it?" Caleb had no answer that would not wound him outside. The wind moved through Harbor Falls like something searching for another door. Inside, Caleb understood that the past was no longer buried in a storage unit or hidden in a dying man's memory. It had found the child, and now it was daring Caleb Mercer to either run from it again or stand between it and Micah Reed. The next storm came before Harbor Falls had recovered from the last one. By late afternoon, the sky over the lake had turned the color of old steel, and the wind pushed snow sideways through Main Street until the storefront signs creaked, and the harbor bells rang without human hands. The town seemed to shrink under it. Doors closed early. Porch lights blurred behind white curtains of weather. The road out of town disappeared beneath drifting snow, and even the lake looked less like water than a dark thought held under ice. Caleb Mercer stood inside Dr. Claire Donovan's clinic and watched Sheriff Owen Vale tape a printed notice beside the rear entrance. Restricted access. Active investigation. It was a small thing, a piece of paper against a storm, but it mattered. After the break, in the night before, Owen had done what Caleb himself would not have thought to do first. He had tightened the perimeter, assigned rotating watch, moved Micah Reed to the interior recovery room, and logged every person who entered. Caleb understood force. Owen understood procedure tonight. Caleb was beginning to understand why both were needed. Micah sat in the back room with Ranger beside him, the Belgian Malinois stretched across the floor like a living barrier between the child and the door. The boy had been quiet all morning, wrapped in the same gray blanket, his pale face too composed beneath his messy brown hair. He did not ask many questions after seeing Nolan's old collar tag and the threatening note. That worried Caleb more than tears would have. Tears moved through a child and left room for breath. Silence stayed. Ranger seemed to know it too. The dog kept pressing his black, masked muzzle against Micah's knee every few minutes, not demanding attention, only reminding him that something warm and steady remained close. Dr. Claire Donovan moved between rooms with controlled urgency, her cream medical coat over pale blue scrubs, hazel eyes tired but unshaken. She had already called the hospital twice to check on Thomas Reed. Thomas remained weak but conscious in brief intervals. He had not said much. Only asked whether Micah was safe, and whether the man with the dog had found the key. Claire had not told Micah that part. Some truths needed timing, not secrecy. Deputy Nora Blake stood at the front counter with her tablet open. Dark blonde ponytail tucked into the collar of her navy police jacket. Gray-green eyes narrowed at the screen. She had been working on the damaged USB drive and the shell company tied to the black truck. The vehicle crossed the county line 3 hours ago, she said, then disappeared from roadside cameras near the East Harbor access. But I found something else. Cole Marine Repair filed an emergency storage transfer this morning. Sheriff Owen looked up. During a storm. Exactly, Nora said. Old equipment removal. After horrors signed by Evan Cole. Caleb turned from the window. He's moving evidence. Owen's square, weathered face tightened. Maybe, or he wants us to think he is. Caleb's first instinct was to go. Now no more waiting. No more letting a man who had frightened a child and stalked an old man breathe comfortably inside a warm office. But Claire's voice stopped him before he reached the door. Caleb. He looked back. She stood near Micah's room, arms folded, her expression steady but not soft. If you go out there with only anger, you bring the war with you. He did not answer. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Micah is listening to every adult in this building. He is learning what danger means from us. Teach him protection, not revenge. The words found the place in Caleb where Nolan's photograph still lived. Protection, not revenge. He looked into the recovery room. Micah was watching him through the partly open door. The boy's blue-gray eyes were wide, not pleading, not accusing, simply waiting to see what kind of man Caleb would become when the storm called him. Caleb forced his hand to relax. Sheriff Leeds, he said. Owen studied him for a moment, then nodded once. Good, Nora. You're with us for documentation and the warrant packet. Caleb. You come because Ranger may track scent and because this case touches your old unit. But you do not move unless I say. Clear? Caleb hated every word and needed every word. Clear. Ranger rose before anyone called him. Micah sat straighter. He's going. Caleb crouched at the doorway. He's going to help us find what your grandpa tried to protect. Micah touched the old collar tag lying in an evidence envelope on the table beside him. Will he come back? Caleb looked at Ranger. The dog's dark amber eyes were focused, obedient mission, ready. But when Micah spoke, his ears softened. Yes, Caleb said. He comes back. Micah nodded, but his lower lip trembled once. He hid it by lowering his face against Ranger's head. Find Dad's truth, he whispered. Ranger stood perfectly still until the boy let go. Outside, the storm swallowed sound. Owen drove the lead patrol SUV, Nora beside him, while Caleb and Ranger rode in the back. The heater pushed warm air against the windows, but Caleb felt cold anyway, not from weather. From memory, snow against glass became dust against goggles. Wind became rotor wash. The road to the harbor became a route through a valley he had tried for years not to revisit. Ranger, sitting beside him, shifted his body until his shoulder pressed against Caleb's knee. The contact was deliberate. Caleb placed one hand lightly on the dog's vest and breathed with the rhythm of the vehicle. Here, now Harbor Falls. Not Mercy Bell, not yet. Cole Marine Repair sat at the edge of the old harbor, a long, low building of corrugated metal and timber, surrounded by half-covered boats, stacked crates, fuel drums, and equipment sheds sealed under snow. A yellow work light burned above the main bay door, swinging in the wind. One dark pickup was parked near the side entrance. Another vehicle, cleaner and newer, sat farther back beneath a lean, to its black paint almost invisible in the storm. Owen killed the headlights before the final turn and parked near the harbor office. Nora, record from here, Caleb. Keep Ranger close. They moved along the side of the building, snow crunching beneath their boots. Ranger lowered his head near the tire tracks, sniffed, then angled toward the rear storage bay. He did not pull hard. He moved with grim certainty. Caleb followed, every sense sharpened, not by combat now, but by the knowledge that Micah was waiting for an answer no child should need. Through a cracked window, they saw Evan Cole inside the bay. Evan's faded dark green work jacket was open over his red-brown flannel shirt, his sturdy body moving with nervous haste as he dragged files from a metal cabinet into a plastic bin. His rough sun-weathered face shone with sweat despite the cold. Beside him stood a man Caleb had never met but recognized from Nora's file the moment he saw him. Graham Voss was in his mid-50s, tall and lean, with a cold, narrow face, sharp, pale gray eyes, neatly combed silver-brown hair, and clean-shaven skin that made him look almost polished. He wore a dark charcoal overcoat over a black turtleneck, dark tailored trousers, polished black leather shoes, and black leather gloves. The gloves were what Caleb noticed most. Clean hands. Thomas's note had been right. Graham did not touch the dirty work unless he had already decided it was safe. His voice carried through the cracked window, calm enough to be more frightening than anger. "You should have burned the storage unit years ago." Evan's voice shook. Thomas kept moving things. "I didn't know where the old man hid the key. And now a child had it." Graham turned slowly. "Do you understand how foolish that sounds?" Evan wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I didn't sign up for threatening kids." "No," Graham said. "You signed up for money. The rest came attached." Ranger suddenly stopped breathing against Caleb's leg. The dog's body went rigid, but instead of looking at Graham or Evan, he stared at a shelf inside the bay where an old mud-stained field pouch lay half. Hidden beneath rope, Caleb's vision narrowed. He knew that pouch. Nolan had carried one like it, patched at the corner with gray tape. Ranger released one low sound, not a growl, not warning this time, but recognition. Caleb felt the years collapse for a second. Nolan had not vanished into memory. A piece of him had been sitting in a repair bay handled by men who wanted his son to never know the truth. Owen touched Caleb's sleeve, grounding him before he moved. "Not yet," the sheriff whispered. Nora's camera kept recording. Inside, Graham continued. The route change was contained. The report was contained. The survivors were contained by guilt, which is always useful. Then, Thomas Reed decided old grief made him brave. Evan looked sick. Nolan knew. He sent proof home. Graham's pale eyes hardened, Nolan suspected. There is a difference. He died for it. "Many people died," Graham said coldly. "That is what happens when small men interfere with large operations." Caleb's hands curled so tightly his knuckles ached. Owen waited 2 more seconds, then opened the rear bay door with authority in his voice. "Sheriff's office, step away from the files." Evan jolted as if struck by the sound. Graham turned with controlled irritation, not fear. "Sheriff Vale," he said, "you are trespassing on private property during a weather emergency." "Funny," Owen replied. "I was about to say the same thing about you and evidence." Nora lifted the tablet. "Recording has been active. We heard enough to continue this conversation at the station." Evan backed toward the workbench. Graham's expression barely changed, but his eyes moved to the bin of files. In that instant, a gust slammed the side door open, scattering loose papers across the floor. Evan panicked and knocked over a metal lantern near a stack of oily rags. Fire caught fast. Not an explosion, not a cinematic burst, but a hungry orange crawl that found old wood and paper too quickly. Smoke rolled upward. Owen ordered everyone back. Nora coughed, stumbling as a shelf shifted under the rush of movement. Caleb moved toward her, but the firelight struck the wall in broken flashes, and suddenly he was not in Harbor Falls. He was back on the Mercy Bell route. Heat smoke, men shouting over static, Nolan's voice somewhere beyond visibility. Ranger barking, pulling, insisting on a direction no one followed in time. Caleb froze for one terrible second. The present thinned. The old guilt opened its mouth. Then Ranger hit him with his shoulder. Hard. The dog barked once, sharp and commanding, then grabbed the fabric of Caleb's sleeve in his teeth and pulled. Not to attack, not to chase, to bring him back. Caleb gasped, blinked, and saw Nora trapped near the fallen shelf, Owen trying to reach Graham, Evan coughing on the floor near the spreading smoke. Here, now Harbor Falls. Not then. Caleb moved. He pulled Nora clear first, lifting the shelf enough for her to slide free. Then, he grabbed Evan by the back of his work jacket and dragged him away from the smoke. Evan clawed at the floor, terrified and babbling. But Caleb did not listen. He was not saving Evan because Evan deserved peace. He was saving him because Micah deserved a world where truth did not require Caleb to become another source of death. Owen forced Graham toward the door, cuffing him outside in the snow, while Nora called for fire response and medical support. The storm made everything harder, slower, but the bay was clearing. Ranger emerged last, carrying the mud-stained field pouch in his mouth. He dropped it at Caleb's feet and stood over it, chest heaving, eyes bright in the swinging work light. Caleb knelt and touched the pouch with 2 fingers. The gray tape patch was real. Inside, protected by a brittle plastic sleeve, was a folded photograph of a newborn baby with a hospital bracelet around one tiny wrist. On the back, in Nolan Reed's handwriting, were 3 words, "Micah, come home." Caleb closed his eyes. For a second, the storm, the smoke, the shouting, even Graham Voss disappeared. All that remained was a father who had wanted to come home and a son who had waited without knowing what he was waiting for. Graham, standing beside Owen's patrol vehicle with cuffs on his wrists, looked at Caleb through the snow. His controlled mask had cracked just enough to show contempt. "Nolan Reed did not die because of me," he said. Owen tightened his grip. "Save it." Graham ignored him. "He died because he turned back for you, Mercer." Caleb looked up slowly. The words struck harder than the cold. Graham's mouth curved without warmth. "That is the part your precious evidence will not forgive." Caleb stood in the snow with Nolan's pouch in his hand, Ranger at his side, and felt the story he had punished himself with for years begin to break apart. Not heal. Not yet. Break. And somewhere across town, in a clinic room guarded by a small nightlight and a frightened child's hope, Micah Reed was waiting for the truth his father had tried to send home. By dawn, the storm over Harbor Falls had begun to break apart. But nothing inside Caleb Mercer felt clearer. The sky beyond the clinic windows was pale and bruised, streaked with the last gray bands of snow, and the town seemed to wake slowly beneath the weight of what had happened at Cole Marine Repair. The fire had been contained before it reached the fuel drums. Evan Cole had been treated for smoke inhalation under guard. Graham Voss sat in a holding room at the sheriff's station, his dark charcoal overcoat taken, his black leather gloves sealed in evidence, his polished calm finally pressed against steel walls and fluorescent light. But Caleb did not feel victory. He stood in the hallway of the clinic with Nolan Reed's mud-stained field pouch in his hands, staring at the brittle plastic sleeve that held the photograph of Micah as a newborn. The baby in the picture was tiny, red-faced, wrapped in a white hospital blanket with a blue stripe, one fist lifted beside his cheek as if already protesting the world. On the back, Nolan had written 3 words, "Micah, come home." Caleb had read them so many times that the ink seemed to move beneath his eyes. Come home. Nolan had written it to himself. Maybe a promise, a prayer, a direction he never got to follow. Ranger lay at Caleb's feet, the Belgian Malinois exhausted but awake, tan tactical vest still faintly smelling of smoke, dark amber eyes tracking every movement near the recovery room door. The dog had not left Caleb since the fire, but his body angled toward Micah, as if he understood that the pouch belonged to the boy even before anyone explained it. Inside the recovery room, Micah Reed sat upright on the cot, wrapped in his blanket, pale face serious beneath his messy brown hair. He had not slept after Caleb returned. He had only watched the pouch, watched Ranger, watched Caleb. Children did not always understand facts, but they understood when adults carried something heavy into a room. Dr. Claire Donovan stood beside Micah with one hand resting gently on the bed rail, Her cream medical coat was creased from a long night. Chestnut brown hair tied back loosely. Hazel eyes tired but steady. She looked at Caleb not with impatience, but with warning. Tell him carefully. Sheriff Owen Vale arrived from the station just after sunrise, shoulders dusted with melting snow, dark brown sheriff jacket unzipped. Square weathered face drawn with fatigue. Deputy Nora Blake came behind him carrying a hard evidence case and a laptop. Her navy police jacket half open. Dark blonde ponytail loosened. Gray-green eyes bright with the brittle focus of someone who had worked through the night, because stopping would have felt like betrayal. Nora was young, but the night had aged something around her mouth. She set the case on Claire's desk. "I recovered part of the USB," she said. "Not all of it. Maybe not even most, but enough." Caleb looked up. "Enough for what?" Nora swallowed. "Enough to know Graham Voss lied about the route. Enough to confirm Nolan knew. And enough to know what Graham said last night wasn't the whole truth." The hallway went still. Micah's small fingers tightened around the blanket. "Is it about my dad?" he asked. Nora looked to Claire first, then Owen. Owen's voice softened. "Yes, son, but we'll go slow." Micah lifted his chin, trying to be brave before anyone had asked him to be. "I want to hear him." That broke something quiet in Caleb. Not see him, not know about him, hear him. Because Micah had no memory of Nolan's voice. No bedtime stories, no birthday songs, no ordinary words from a father in the kitchen, only silence people had filled with. He was brave, and he loved you, and you were too little to remember. Claire crouched beside the cot. "Micah, if it feels too much, we stop. You can say stop any time." Micah nodded, but his eyes stayed on the laptop. Ranger rose, walked to the cot, and placed his head against Micah's knee. The boy's hand found the dog's black mask and rested there. Nora opened the file. The video was damaged. The first seconds were broken into gray blocks and static. Then a young man's face appeared in dim light. Sergeant Nolan Reed looked about 27, lean and athletic, with warm green eyes, an open, sincere face, short sandy, brown hair, and light stubble along his jaw. He wore a standard green digital camouflage uniform. No helmet, no tactical vest, no weapon visible, just a tired soldier sitting close to a camera in a place where sleep had likely become rare. He looked younger than Caleb remembered, and older than he should have. "If this reaches Dad," Nolan said, his voice distorted but clear enough, "I need you to keep the box safe. Don't take it to the local office. Don't trust the route paperwork. Someone changed the Mercy Bell manifests after final review." The image skipped. Static tore through his face. When it returned, Nolan was looking down at something in his hand. "Micah," he said, and the room changed around that name. Micah stopped breathing for a second. Caleb saw it. Claire saw it. Ranger felt it and pressed closer. Nolan's voice trembled, but he smiled. "I haven't met you yet, little man. That's the worst part. I keep thinking I'll know what to say when I see you, but I probably won't. I'll probably just stand there like an idiot and cry." A broken laugh came through the speaker. "Your mom would have laughed at me for that." Micah's eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. The video skipped again. Nolan's face returned, more serious now. "If I don't come home, don't let anyone tell you I chose the mission over you. I chose to come home to you every day. Every day, I just might not get the choice in the end." At that moment, Ranger lifted his head from Micah's knee and turned toward the laptop before Nolan said the next words. The dog's ears softened, and a low breath left his chest. The same mournful sound he had made at the frozen pier. On the screen, Nolan looked just past the camera and said, "And if Mercer is alive, tell him the dog was right." Caleb's face went white. The room seemed to tilt. Nolan continued. Ranger kept pulling toward the ridge. "I saw it. Caleb saw it too, but command was screaming route discipline, and we were already boxed in. If this goes bad, it wasn't because he failed us. It was because someone made sure the right warning looked like disobedience. Caleb could not move. The old memory opened, but this time it was different. For years he had remembered hesitation as guilt, Ranger pulling, Caleb doubting, the team moving forward, the world breaking open. But Nolan had known the dog was right. Nolan had known Caleb's guilt would build itself around that second and live there like a prison. The video stuttered. Nolan's voice returned in fragments. Caleb always turns back. That's who he is. If he gets out and I don't let him turn survival into a sentence. The file froze on Nolan's face, then went black. Nobody spoke. Even the clinic seemed to hold still, the furnace silent between cycles, the snow outside no longer striking the windows. Caleb lowered himself into the chair because his legs no longer trusted him. Micah stared at the blank screen. His small face had changed. Not healed, not relieved, but something had entered the emptiness where his father had been. A voice, a laugh, a direct address from a man who had loved him before memory could hold love. He said my name, Micah whispered. Claire wiped one tear from her cheek quickly, not hiding it well enough. Yes, she said. He did. Micah looked at Caleb. Did my dad save you? Caleb opened his mouth, but no answer came. There were answers a man could give from training, from pride, from pain. None of them were right for a 6-year-old holding the first sound of his father's voice. Caleb looked down at his hands. They were steady in combat. They shook now. I think, he said slowly, your dad tried to save everyone he could, me included. Micah thought about that. Was he scared? Caleb looked at Nolan's frozen face on the dark screen. Yes, Micah's lip trembled. Then how was he brave? Caleb leaned forward. Because brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. Brave means you are scared and you still love someone enough to do the right thing. Micah looked at Ranger, then at the pouch in Caleb's hands. Did he love me? This time Caleb did not hesitate. More than anything. The tears finally came then. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent lines down Micah's cheeks as he leaned into Ranger's neck. Ranger did not move. The dog held himself perfectly still, as if he understood that any sudden motion might break the moment. Claire sat beside the boy and placed a hand on his back. Owen turned toward the window, jaw tight. Nora closed the laptop with unusual gentleness. Thomas Reed was brought from the hospital later that afternoon, after doctors cleared him for a brief supervised visit to the clinic before transfer to a larger facility. He arrived in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse, wrapped in a hospital blanket, looking smaller than he had on the floor of his own house. His silver gray hair was combed but thin, his rough stubble trimmed badly, his pale blue eyes watery and exhausted. Yet when he saw Micah, life returned to his face with such force that Caleb had to look away. Micah ran to him carefully, stopping short as if afraid to hurt him, then climbed into his lap when Thomas opened his arms. The old man held the boy with shaking hands. I'm sorry, Thomas whispered. I tried to keep it away from you. Micah pressed his face into his grandfather's shoulder. Dad talked to me. Thomas closed his eyes. The pain that moved across his face was not only grief, it was release. Good, he said. That's good. Later, Thomas told them the part he had carried alone. Nolan had sent the box before the final Mercy Bell movement. Thomas had tried once to raise questions through an old Coast Guard contact, a quiet man named Harold Baines who had worked harbor inspections after retirement. Harold had warned Thomas not to push without stronger proof. 2 weeks later, Harold died in a winter road accident that Thomas never believed was simple. After that, Thomas hid the box, moved the key, and waited for the man Nolan had described in a letter, Mercer, with the dog that hears what men ignore. I was afraid, Thomas admitted, his voice thin. Afraid they'd take Micah, afraid they'd make Nolan look guilty, afraid if I spoke too soon, the truth would die with me anyway. Claire sat near him, not judging. Fear can make people silent, she said. That doesn't mean they stopped loving. Thomas looked at Caleb. Nolan didn't want you carrying this. Caleb's throat tightened. I carried it anyway. Then put some of it down. Caleb could not answer. Micah approached slowly, holding Nolan's old collar tag in both hands. He looked at it, then at Ranger. Can he wear it? Owen started to speak, probably about evidence, but Nora touched his sleeve and whispered that the tag had already been photographed, scanned, and logged. Owen nodded once. Micah stepped closer to Ranger and tied the old tag carefully onto the simple working dog collar beneath the tan vest. It rested there, small and scratched, against the dog's dark fur. "You found him," Micah whispered to Ranger. "Not like a person, but like enough." Ranger lowered his head until his forehead touched the boy's chest. Caleb watched, and something in him loosened with pain so deep it almost felt like mercy. That night, after Thomas was taken back for further care and Micah finally slept in the clinic room with Claire nearby, Caleb opened the last envelope from Nolan's box. It was addressed in Nolan's handwriting, to Caleb, "When you finally stop living like the man who should have died." Caleb stood alone in the hallway, Ranger beside him wearing Nolan's tag, the lights low, the storm beyond the windows fading into a quiet snowfall. He did not open the letter yet, not because he was afraid of the truth now, but because for the first time in years he understood that truth was not something to survive all at once. Sometimes it had to be received like a wounded person being carried home, carefully, with both hands, and with someone loyal standing close enough to remind you to breathe. Spring did not arrive in Harbor Falls all at once. It came carefully, as if the town itself needed time to believe winter was really loosening its grip. Snow retreated first from the porch steps, then from the fence lines, then from the narrow road that led toward the frozen pier where Caleb Mercer had found Micah Reed in the storm. The lake remained dark and cold for weeks, broken in places by thin plates of ice that drifted and knocked softly against the posts of the old dock. But the air changed. It carried water instead of knives. It carried thaw instead of warning. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb noticed he still walked every evening with Ranger at his side, the Belgian Malinois moving in steady rhythm beside him, deep fawn, to mahogany coat catching the low gold light, black facial mask calm and alert. Nolan Reed's scratched old tag resting against the simple working dog collar beneath the tan tactical vest. Caleb was still the same man to anyone passing him on Main Street, a male Navy SEAL in his early 30s with a rugged, angular face, sharp jawline, clean-shaven skin, cold blue-gray eyes, a neat short undercut, and the disciplined posture of a soldier who never forgot exits, windows, or shadows. He still wore the same complete green digital camouflage uniform, black belt, and black combat boots, without weapons or extra gear, standing and moving with quiet authority. But something beneath the stillness had changed. His calm no longer felt like a locked door. It felt, some days, like a man holding the door open a little, testing whether the world would rush in or simply wait. Graham Voss had been transferred out of Harbor Falls under federal custody. Evan Cole had given a statement after the fire, not because he had suddenly become brave, but because men like him often confessed when the person above them could no longer protect them. Sheriff Owen Vale had made sure every piece of evidence moved through the proper channels. The recovered USB fragments, the recorded conversation in the repair bay, the Mercy Bell documents, the storage unit photographs, Nolan's video, the route manifests, even the old collar tag that Micah had been allowed to tie onto Ranger only after it had been fully documented. Owen, with his broad shoulders, tired, honest eyes, and weathered face, did not celebrate. He only kept working because justice in a small town did not arrive with music. It arrived with signatures, phone calls, reports, and people willing to keep telling the truth when the first excitement faded. Deputy Nora Blake continued helping the federal investigators organize the digital files. The young deputy with gray, green eyes and dark blonde hair tied in a low ponytail had become quieter since the night of the fire, but also steadier. She no longer joked every time a room became heavy. Sometimes she simply stood with the weight of it and did her work. Dr. Claire Donovan helped Thomas Reed arrange follow-up, care, home support, and a small community fund that Thomas hated at first because old pride is often harder to treat than illness. Thomas was recovering slowly, still thin and stooped, with silver, gray hair, watery blue eyes, rough gray stubble, and hands that shook when he tried to button his old dark olive coat. Yet when Micah entered a room, Thomas's whole face changed. It was not strength exactly, but purpose. Micah had returned to the yellow house for part of each week, though Claire and Owen made sure support was in place. Mrs. Evelyn Harper, the elderly neighbor who had once been too frightened to report the black truck, began crossing the snowy yard with soup, bread, and small bags of groceries. She was a small 74-year-old woman with a deeply lined, gentle face, cloudy, pale blue eyes, white hair pinned neatly at the back, trembling hands, and the kind of worried kindness that apologizes even while helping. Her dark burgundy cardigan and cream shawl became a familiar sight on Thomas's porch. "I should have said something sooner," she told Caleb once. Caleb looked at her and shook his head. "You're saying it now." That was something he was learning too. Healing rarely began on time. Sometimes it began late, awkwardly, with regret in its hands. But it still began. Micah changed in smaller ways. He was still a thin 6-year-old boy with pale skin, anxious blue-gray eyes, and messy medium. Brown hair that never stayed flat no matter how Claire tried to comb it. He still wore his oversized dark navy winter coat when the air turned cold, still kept his small flashlight on the table beside his bed, still woke some nights and needed to check that Thomas was breathing. But he laughed more often now, especially with Ranger. The first time Caleb heard it, he had been repairing the loose hinge on Thomas's back door. Ranger had rolled onto his side in the thawing yard, while Micah tried to brush mud from his vest with solemn seriousness. Ranger sneezed once, spraying slush onto the boy's boots. Micah laughed so suddenly that Caleb froze with the screwdriver in his hand. The sound was light, unguarded, and completely unaware of how much power it had. It entered Caleb's chest, like sunlight through a crack in a boarded window. That evening, Caleb finally opened Nolan's last letter. He sat alone at the kitchen table in his cabin while Ranger lay near the door. Ears relaxed, but eyes half open, Nolan's tag faintly clicking whenever the dog shifted. The envelope read, "To Caleb, when you finally stop living like the man who should have died." Caleb expected confession, strategy, maybe more evidence. Instead, Nolan had written about ordinary things. "If you meet my son," the letter said, "do not only tell him how I died, tell him I hated burnt coffee. Tell him I sang badly when I was nervous. Tell him I was scared of heights and climbed anyway, because you were worse at admitting fear than I was. Tell him I wanted to teach him how to skip stones. Tell him I loved him before I knew the color of his eyes. And Caleb, if you are reading this, stop making my choice into your punishment. I turned back because you would have turned back for me. That is not a debt, that is brotherhood." Caleb read the last line 3 times before the words blurred. Ranger rose, crossed the kitchen, and placed his head on Caleb's knee. Caleb did not push him away. He lowered one hand to the dog's head and let the silence hold him without turning it into a prison. The memorial took place 2 weeks later at the old pier. After the town repaired the broken rescue beacon and cleared the walkway. It was not a large ceremony. Nolan Reed had been gone too long for official pageantry to feel right, and Micah was too young for grief dressed up in speeches. But the people who needed to be there came. Thomas arrived in his old olive coat and gray scarf, leaning on a cane, face pale but determined. Claire stood nearby in her cream medical coat, one hand ready in case he grew weak. Sheriff Owen came in uniform, solemn and quiet. Deputy Nora stood beside him, holding a small folder of printed photographs from the recovered files. Mrs. Evelyn brought a white flower wrapped in paper. Caleb stood near the edge of the pier with Ranger at his left side, both facing the lake. Micah stood between Thomas and Caleb, wearing his oversized navy coat, gray sweater, dark denim pants, brown winter boots, and dark blue beanie. In his hands, he held Nolan's field pouch, The old dock no longer looked like the place where Caleb had found a frightened child under a broken shelter. The rescue beacon now worked. Its red cover had been replaced. Someone had cleared the sign that read the Mercy Bell, not to honor the lies attached to the old route, but to remember that even a corrupted name could be reclaimed by truth. Caleb spoke because Thomas asked him to. He did not speak long. He did not describe classified details, and he did not turn Nolan into a statue. He told Micah and the small group about a young soldier who wrote letters by flashlight, laughed when everyone else was too tired, carried a picture of a son he had not met, and believed going home was not weakness, but the reason brave men endured hard things. Nolan Reed was not brave because he was never afraid, Caleb said, his voice steady but low. He was brave because fear did not stop him from loving people. It did not stop him from choosing them. Micah looked up at him. Caleb saw that the boy was crying now, but not trying to hide it. That mattered. Thomas placed a shaking hand on Micah's shoulder. Claire wiped her cheek. Owen bowed his head. Nora looked out over the lake with her jaw tight. Ranger stayed perfectly still, the old tag on his collar catching the pale light. Micah stepped to the edge of the pier and placed the white flower on the water. It rested for a moment against a thin sheet of melting ice before drifting free. "Bye, Dad," he whispered, not loud, not dramatic. Just enough for the lake, the wind, and the people who loved him to hear. Ranger moved, then one small step forward, and pressed his shoulder against Micah's leg. Micah reached down without looking and rested his hand on the dog's head. Caleb watched them and realized he was not hearing the old battlefield in his mind. Not in that moment. He heard water. He heard wind. He heard a child breathing through grief and still standing. Claire came beside Caleb after the ceremony as people began walking back toward town. "You brought him home," she said. Caleb looked at the lake. "Nolan did most of that himself." "Maybe," Claire said, "but you opened the door." He did not answer because the words reached somewhere he was not ready to name. Over the next weeks, Caleb fixed the porch light on his cabin. It had been broken for months, maybe longer. He had never needed it. He knew the steps in the dark. Ranger knew them too. But one evening, Micah asked why the house always looked asleep from the road, and Caleb had no good answer. So he replaced the wiring, cleaned the glass, and screwed in a warm yellow bulb. The first night it glowed. Micah stood on the porch with both hands in his coat pockets and nodded with grave approval. "Now people can find it," he said. Caleb looked at Ranger. The dog's tail moved once. "Yeah," Caleb said, "that's the idea." The final evening of the story came soft and cool, with spring rain tapping lightly against the cabin windows. Micah had come over with Thomas and Claire for dinner, though Thomas fell asleep in an armchair before dessert, and Claire pretended not to notice so the old man could keep his dignity. Micah read a children's book aloud to Ranger on the living room rug, stumbling over bigger words but refusing help. Ranger lay with his head on his paws, listening as if every word mattered. Halfway through the story, Micah fell asleep against the dog's side. Ranger did not move. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching the boy, the dog, the old man resting by the fire, and Claire quietly setting cups in the sink. The scene was ordinary. That was what made it almost unbearable. Once, Caleb had believed his life after Mercy Bell would be nothing but survival. Walks in the dark, doors locked, memories managed, kindness left anonymously because closeness cost too much. But the light on the porch was on now. Micah knew where to find him. Thomas knew he did not have to carry the past alone. Claire moved through the room as if she had never been afraid of his silence. Ranger lifted his head and looked at Caleb, dark amber eyes calm beneath the black mask, Nolan's tag resting against his collar. Caleb gave the dog a small nod. "Thank you," it meant, for hearing the boy, for hearing Nolan, for hearing the part of Caleb that had been calling for help long before Caleb knew how to admit it. Caleb did not become healed in a single night. Men like him did not step out of grief as if leaving a room. He would still wake sometimes before dawn. He would still remember. He would still carry names. But now, when the dark came, there was a light on the porch. There was a dog at his side. There was a child who had learned that crying did not make him weak. There were people who knew the truth and stayed. Outside, the rain washed the last gray snow from the steps. Inside, Caleb Mercer stood in the warm light of a home that no longer looked asleep. And for the first time in years, he let himself believe that returning was not the same as forgetting. Sometimes it was the only honest way to remember. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive with thunder, bright lights, or a voice from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, through a dog that refuses to walk away, through a child brave enough to keep going, through a wounded soldier who still has enough love left in his heart to open the door when someone needs him. Caleb thought his life had ended with the men he lost. Micah thought his father was only a story people were afraid to tell. Thomas thought the truth had been buried too deep. But in the middle of a storm, God placed them on the same road at the right moment, with one loyal K9 leading the way. Maybe that is how grace works in everyday life. It does not always remove the pain. It does not erase the past. But it sends someone to stand beside us when we are cold, lost, afraid, or carrying something too heavy alone. Sometimes healing begins with a small act of courage. Sometimes it begins when someone finally says, "You do not have to carry this by yourself anymore." So if this story reminded you of someone who showed up for you when you needed help, or someone you still carry in your heart, share their name or their story in the comments. Your words may become comfort for someone else watching tonight. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below, and subscribe to Navy SEAL and K9 Stories for more stories of courage, loyalty, faith, and healing. May God bless you, protect your family, guide your steps, and bring light to every dark road you may be walking tonight. Until the next story, stay strong, stay kind, and never forget that sometimes God sends help on 4 paws.